The morning sun shone through the blinds of Isabel's bedroom as her alarm clock buzzed loudly. She groaned and reached over to silence it, already feeling the weight of the day ahead. As a federal judge, her calendar was packed with cases that would determine people's futures. Today was no different. Isabel Washington had been on the bench for nearly 15 years now. At 48, she had earned every bit of respect she commanded in the courtroom. But outside those walls, dressed in anything other than her black robe, she was just another black woman in America. Another day, another battle. She muttered to herself as she pulled herself out of bed and headed for the shower. The hot water helped clear her mind as she thought about the complex case she'd be presiding over today. A high-profile corruption case involving a city official had the whole town talking. She needed to be sharp, focused, and completely impartial. 2 hours later, Isabel sat tall in her judge's chair, listening carefully as lawyers presented their arguments. The courtroom was her domain. Here, her word was final. Here, everyone addressed her as Your Honor. Here, no one questioned her authority or her right to be where she was. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Isabel announced, bringing down her gavel with a decisive tap. She gathered her notes and retreated to her chambers where her clerk waited with more files. "How did it go, Judge Washington?" asked Tina, her clerk of 5 years. "About as expected. Both sides have strong arguments. I'll need to review some precedents tonight." Isabel sighed, setting her files down on the large mahogany desk that dominated the room. "You look tired. Long night?" "Just the usual insomnia." "Nothing new." Isabel smiled weakly. "I think I'll head out a bit early today. I've got those files reviewed already and I could use some fresh air." Tina nodded understandingly. "You've been going nonstop for weeks. Take care of yourself, Judge." Isabel changed out of her robe and into the casual clothes she'd brought with her. A pair of well-worn jeans, a simple blue sweater, and comfortable sneakers. She let her hair down from its formal bun, the tight curls framing her face. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. In these clothes, she wasn't Judge Washington anymore. She was just Isabel. The drive home took her through the busier part of town. As she stopped at a red light, Isabel realized she needed to pick up a few things for dinner. There was a convenience store on the corner that she occasionally stopped at. Nothing fancy, but it would have what she needed. She pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. For a moment, she sat there, feeling the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders, the weight of having to be extra careful, extra polite, extra everything. Even after all these years, after reaching the pinnacle of her profession, she still couldn't escape it. The store was brightly lit and mostly empty. A bell chimed as Isabel pushed open the door. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a name tag that read, Frank Miller, manager. He barely looked up when she entered, too busy restocking cigarettes behind the counter. Isabel grabbed a small basket and headed down the first aisle. She needed pasta, sauce, maybe some bread if they had any decent loaves left. Simple comfort food after a long day. She had just picked up a box of spaghetti when she noticed Frank's reflection in the security mirror mounted in the corner of the store. He had stopped what he was doing and was now watching her intently. Isabel pretended not to notice, though her heart rate quickened slightly. This was nothing new. Moving to the next aisle, she scanned the shelves for pasta sauce. From the corner of her eye, she could see Frank had now moved from behind the counter and was straightening items on a shelf not far from her. Unusually close for someone just doing their job. "Can I help you find something?" His voice was flat, without the customer service cheeriness one might expect. "No, thank you. I'm just picking up a few things for dinner," Isabel replied with a polite smile, the kind she had perfected over decades of navigating these situations. Frank nodded but didn't return to the counter. Instead, he continued to hover, moving when she moved, staying unnervingly close. Isabel's basket now held pasta sauce and a small loaf of Italian bread. She headed to the refrigerated section for some Parmesan cheese. As she reached for the cheese, she noticed a young white couple enter the store. Frank immediately perked up, offering a friendly, "Evening, folks. Let me know if you need anything." His voice was warm, welcoming, completely different from the tone he had used with her. The contrast wasn't lost on Isabel. She'd experienced this kind of treatment countless times before, but it never stopped stinging. Still, she kept her composure, added the cheese to her basket, and decided to grab a bottle of wine to help unwind after dinner. The wine section was small but adequate. Isabel selected a reasonably priced Merlot and added it to her basket. As she turned to head toward the checkout, she nearly bumped into Frank, who had somehow materialized directly behind her. "I'll take that," he said, reaching for the wine bottle in her basket. "Excuse me?" Isabel blinked in surprise. "The wine? I'll need to see your ID." His eyes narrowed slightly. Isabel set her basket down on a nearby shelf and reached for her purse. "Of course, no problem." At 48, she was well used to the occasional ID check, though it happened less frequently these days. She opened her wallet and handed over her driver's license. Frank studied it with exaggerated care, looking back and forth between the photo and her face several times. "This doesn't look like you," he finally said, holding the ID up. Isabel fought to keep her voice level. "It was taken a few years ago, but it's definitely me." Frank's eyes moved from the ID to Isabel's face again. "I'm not convinced. Do you have any other identification?" A knot formed in Isabel's stomach. She had been through this drill before. Taking a deep breath, she reached back into her purse and pulled out her credit card. "Here's my credit card. The name matches my license." Frank barely glanced at it. "That doesn't prove anything." The young couple at the counter was now watching the interaction, their expressions uncomfortable. Isabel felt her cheeks growing warm, not from embarrassment but from the slow-burning anger that was building inside her. Still, she kept her voice calm and controlled, a skill honed through years in the courtroom. "I assure you that is my identification. I'm just trying to purchase a few items for dinner." Frank crossed his arms. "I've been having trouble with shoplifters lately. Would you mind showing me what's in your purse?" And there it was. The accusation wasn't even veiled anymore. "Excuse me?" Isabel's voice dropped slightly, taking on the edge she typically reserved for disruptive behavior in her courtroom. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm just doing my job, making sure everything's on the up and up," Frank replied, his stance becoming more aggressive. "If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem showing me your purse." Isabel's mind raced through her options. She could simply leave, abandon her shopping, and walk out. But something in her refused to be chased away like a criminal when she'd done nothing wrong. She could cause a scene, demand to see the owner, call someone, but years of experience had taught her that escalation rarely worked in her favor in these situations. Instead, she chose the path she always did, dignity above all else. "I understand you have a job to do, Mr. Miller," she said, deliberately using his name from the tag, "but I have not given you any reason to suspect me of shoplifting. I've been shopping in full view of your security cameras the entire time." She gestured to the obvious camera in the corner. "I'd like to pay for my items now." Frank's face hardened. "I think we have a problem here." "The only problem," Isabel replied evenly, "is that you've decided I look suspicious without any evidence whatsoever." "I know what I know," Frank said, his voice rising slightly. "And I know your type thinks you can just walk in here and take whatever you want." The young couple at the counter was now openly staring. The woman whispered something to her partner, who shook his head in what appeared to be disapproval. Isabel felt a familiar sinking feeling. This wasn't going to end well. Decades of fighting for justice in the courtroom, and she still couldn't buy pasta without being treated like a criminal. "My type?" Isabel repeated, her voice quiet but firm. "And what type would that be, Mr. Miller?" Frank's face flushed red. "You know exactly what I mean. Now either show me what's in that purse or I'm calling the cops." The threat hung in the air between them. Isabel stood perfectly still, her mind racing through the potential outcomes. She had done nothing wrong. The security footage would show that. But she also knew how these situations could spiral out of control, how quickly things could turn dangerous. After a long moment, Isabel spoke, her voice steady despite the anger and hurt churning inside her. "Mr. Miller, I believe you're making a serious mistake. But if you feel you need to call the police, go ahead. I'll wait right here." Frank seemed momentarily taken aback by her calm response. He had clearly expected her to either give in or storm out. Instead, she was calling his bluff, except it wasn't a bluff. "Fine," he snapped, pulling out his cell phone. "Don't move." He dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Isabel's face. And so Judge Isabel Washington, respected federal judge who had sentenced corrupt politicians, drug lords, and violent criminals, stood quietly in a convenience store, waiting for police to arrive because she wanted to buy spaghetti for dinner. The next 15 minutes felt like an eternity to Isabel. Frank had forced her to move to a small office at the back of the store, refusing to let her leave. The young couple had left quickly, avoiding eye contact, their discomfort evident but not enough to make them speak up. "You can't just detain me like this," Isabel said, standing with her arms crossed rather than sitting in the chair Frank had gestured toward. "This is unlawful detention." "Citizen's arrest," Frank shot back, looking almost pleased with himself. "Perfectly legal when I have reasonable suspicion a crime's been committed." Isabel felt her jaw tighten. As a federal judge, she knew exactly what constituted a legal citizen's arrest, and this wasn't it. Frank had no actual evidence, just his own prejudice, but arguing legal technicalities with him would only escalate the situation. "The police will be here soon," she said calmly. "Let's wait for them." Frank stood guard at the door, his phone clutched tightly in his hand as if he expected her to make a run for it. The small office was cramped and smelled of cigarettes. A desk cluttered with paperwork took up most of the space, and a row of security monitors lined one wall, showing grainy black and white footage of the store. Isabel glanced at the monitors, noting that they clearly showed her shopping, selecting items and putting them in her basket. Not once did the footage show her slipping anything into her pockets or purse. The evidence of her innocence was right there, but Frank wasn't interested in looking. "Been having trouble with people like you?" Frank muttered, almost to himself. "Coming in here thinking they can take whatever they want." Isabel took a deep breath. "People like me? You know what I mean." Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't think I do. Why don't you explain it to me?" Isabel's voice was level, the same tone she used when questioning difficult witnesses in her courtroom. Frank shifted uncomfortably. "Just troublemakers. People who don't respect other people's property. And how exactly did you identify me as a troublemaker?" Isabel pressed, knowing full well what the answer was. Frank's face reddened. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know what to look for." "And what were you looking for, Mr. Miller?" Isabel asked quietly. The wail of police sirens outside saved Frank from having to answer. His relief was visible as he stepped out of the office, leaving Isabel alone for a moment. She used the opportunity to take several deep breaths, centering herself. Despite the injustice of the situation, she knew that losing her composure now would only make things worse. Through the security monitors, Isabel watched as 2 police officers entered the store. One was a tall white man who looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair at his temples and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe early 30s, with light brown skin that suggested a mixed heritage. They spoke briefly with Frank, who gestured animatedly toward the back office. The door opened and the officers stepped in. The older officer took the lead. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds and this is Officer Diaz. We've received a report of a shoplifting incident." Isabel nodded. "I understand. I'm Isabel Washington, and I assure you I haven't taken anything from this store." Frank pushed his way into the already crowded office. She was acting suspicious, putting things in her pockets. "I did no such thing," Isabel replied firmly. "Your own security cameras will confirm that." Officer Reynolds looked between them, his expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, would you mind if we looked in your purse?" Isabel knew her rights. She could refuse. But she also knew that cooperating was the fastest way to resolve this situation. "I have nothing to hide," she said, handing over her purse. Officer Diaz took it and began a methodical search. He found her wallet, her phone, a small makeup bag, a packet of tissues, and a pen. "Nothing from the store." "Your pockets as well, please," Reynolds said, though his tone had softened slightly. Isabel turned out the pockets of her jeans and sweater. "Empty." Frank's face was a mixture of confusion and stubbornness. She must have put it back when she saw me watching. "Let's take a look at the security footage," Officer Diaz suggested, his voice professional but kind. Frank hesitated, then reluctantly moved to the desk and tapped on the keyboard connected to the monitors. He rewound the footage to when Isabel first entered the store. The 4 of them watched in silence as Isabel shopped, selecting items and placing them in her basket. Not once did the footage show her putting anything in her pockets or purse. "Looks like there's been a misunderstanding," Officer Reynolds said after a few minutes. Frank's face hardened. "The cameras don't catch everything. I know what I saw." Officer Diaz cleared his throat. "Sir, we've checked the lady's belongings and the footage. There's no evidence that any crime was committed. So you're just going to let her go?" Frank's voice rose. "What about my rights as a business owner?" You have the right to refuse service, Reynolds replied evenly. But you don't have the right to detain someone without evidence of a crime. Isabel could see Frank's anger building. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, and a vein pulsed in his forehead. She decided it was time to end this. Officers, I'd like to leave now, she said calmly. I no longer feel comfortable shopping here. Reynolds nodded. Of course, ma'am. We'll escort you to your car. Wait, Frank sputtered. You don't know who she is. She could be dangerous. Isabel almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Her dangerous? At 5'4" in her late 40s, dressed in casual clothes and carrying nothing but a small purse? Officer Diaz raised an eyebrow. Sir, we've established there was no crime. Unless you have some other reason to believe this woman is dangerous. Frank fell silent, unable to articulate any reason beyond his own prejudice. As they prepared to leave the office, Isabel reached into her wallet and pulled out a business card. She hesitated for just a moment, then handed it to Officer Reynolds. He glanced at it, his eyes widening slightly as he read, Isabel Washington, United States Federal Judge, District Court. Reynolds looked up, a new understanding dawning on his face. Judge Washington, he said, his tone now distinctly respectful. Officer Diaz glanced at the card and then quickly straightened his posture. Your Honor, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Frank, who had been following them out of the office, stopped abruptly. What is it? Reynolds turned to Frank, his expression serious. Mr. Miller, do you realize who you've been accusing of shoplifting? This is Federal Judge Isabel Washington. The color drained from Frank's face so quickly that Isabel momentarily worried he might faint. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. I didn't know, he finally managed to stammer. Would it have made a difference if you had? Isabel asked quietly. Frank couldn't meet her eyes. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. Judge Washington, I sincerely apologize for this incident, Officer Reynolds said. Would you like to file a formal complaint against Mr. Miller? Isabel considered her options. She could pursue this legally. She had every right to. Frank had racially profiled her, falsely accused her, and unlawfully detained her. As a federal judge, she could make sure he faced serious consequences. But looking at him now, his face ashen with the realization of what he'd done and who she was, Isabel thought about the bigger picture. Would punishing this one man change the systemic issues that had led to this encounter? Or was there a more constructive path forward? Not at this time, she finally said. But I would like Officer Diaz to escort me to my car, and I'd like my basket of groceries. I still need to make dinner tonight. Reynolds nodded and turned to Frank. Mr. Miller, I suggest you get the judge's groceries ready. And I strongly recommend you reconsider how you assess suspicious behavior in your store. Frank nodded mutely and hurried out to retrieve Isabel's shopping basket. As Officer Diaz walked Isabel to her car, the evening air felt cool against her skin. She realized how tense her shoulders had become during the confrontation and consciously tried to relax them. I'm sorry this happened to you, Your Honor, Officer Diaz said quietly as they reached her car. Isabel sighed. It's not the first time, officer. And sadly, it probably won't be the last. It shouldn't happen at all, he replied, a hint of frustration in his voice. Especially not to someone like you. Isabel turned to him. It shouldn't happen to anyone, Officer Diaz, regardless of who they are or what position they hold. He nodded, understanding the gentle correction. You're right, of course. Frank appeared, hurrying across the parking lot with Isabel's basket of groceries. He looked thoroughly chastened now, his earlier bravado completely vanished. Your groceries, Judge, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's no charge, of course. Isabel looked at him steadily. I'll pay for my groceries, Mr. Miller. I don't want anything for free. She took out her wallet and handed him the exact amount for the items. Their fingers briefly touched during the exchange, and Frank flinched as if burned. Thank you, she said simply, taking the grocery bag from him. As she got into her car, Isabel could see Frank and the officer still standing in the parking lot watching her. She placed the groceries on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove away. The spaghetti dinner she had planned no longer seemed appealing. Isabel wondered if she would even have an appetite after what had happened. But she had faced discrimination before and knew she would face it again. The key was not letting it consume her. Tonight she would eat her dinner, review her case files, and prepare for court tomorrow. Because no matter what happened in that convenience store, She was still Judge Isabel Washington, and tomorrow she would return to her courtroom, where her authority was unquestioned, and continue her life's work, ensuring that justice was served for everyone, regardless of who they were. Isabel barely slept that night. She tossed and turned, replaying the incident at the convenience store over and over in her mind. The look on Frank's face when he realized who she was kept appearing in her thoughts, not remorse for what he'd done, but fear of the consequences. That's what bothered her most. By morning, she had made up her mind. This incident wouldn't just fade away like so many others before it. She wouldn't let it. She arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, the building quiet and mostly empty. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating patterns on the marble floor as she made her way to her chambers. Her heels clicked rhythmically, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. Tina arrived 30 minutes later, surprised to find Isabel already at her desk, surrounded by papers. "You're in early," Tina remarked, setting down a cup of coffee on Isabel's desk. "Everything okay?" Isabel looked up from the document she was reading. "I had an interesting experience yesterday, at Miller's convenience store on Oak Street." Tina raised an eyebrow. "Interesting how?" Isabel recounted the events, keeping her voice level and matter-of-fact, though the memory still made her chest tighten with anger and humiliation. When she finished, Tina was silent for a long moment, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. That's awful. Are you going to file charges? You could destroy him." Isabel sighed, leaning back in her chair. "That's what I've been thinking about all night. What good would it do to ruin one man's life? Would it change anything in the bigger picture?" "He deserves whatever comes to him," Tina said firmly. "Maybe," Isabel agreed. "But I keep thinking about all the people who go through what I went through yesterday, who don't have the protection of a federal judge's title. What happens to them? How do they find justice?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up below. "I think there might be a better way to handle this. A way that could actually make a difference." Before she could explain further, there was a knock at the door. Tina opened it to find Officer Reynolds and Officer Diaz standing there, both looking somewhat uncomfortable in the formal setting of the courthouse. "Judge Washington," Reynolds said, removing his hat. "Sorry to disturb you so early. We wanted to follow up on yesterday's incident." Isabel gestured for them to come in. "No apology necessary, officers. I appreciate your concern." Diaz cleared his throat. "We spoke with our captain about what happened. He suggested we should file an official report about Mr. Miller's behavior. I was actually just discussing that with my clerk," Isabel said, gesturing to Tina. "Please have a seat and tell me what you're thinking." The four of them sat around a small conference table in the corner of Isabel's chambers. Officer Reynolds pulled out a notepad. "After you left last night, we had a longer conversation with Mr. Miller," he began. He was scared, to be honest. Kept asking if you were going to sue him or have him arrested." "And what did you tell him?" Isabel asked. "That it was entirely up to you," Diaz replied. "But that racial profiling is a serious matter, especially when it leads to unlawful detention." Isabel nodded slowly. "Did he admit that's what he did? Racially profile me?" The officers exchanged glances. "Not in so many words," Reynolds said. "He claimed it was about patterns of behavior he's observed over the years. Said he was just doing his job." "Of course he did," Tina muttered. Isabel tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "And if I were to pursue legal action? What would likely happen? Given your position and the clear evidence, he'd probably face charges for unlawful detention at minimum," Reynolds explained. "His business would suffer, and there would likely be a civil suit as well." "He'd be finished," Diaz added. "Financially and reputation-wise." Isabel was quiet for a moment, considering. And how many other store owners in this city do exactly what Frank did yesterday? How many people get profiled, followed, accused, detained, just because of how they look? No one answered. They didn't need to. Would punishing Frank Miller change any of that? She continued. Or would it just make him more careful about who he profiles in the future? "With all due respect, Judge," Diaz said carefully, "sometimes consequences are necessary to create change." "I agree," Isabel replied. "But I want the right kind of change. Not just for me, but for everyone who walks into that store, or any store." She stood up and began pacing slowly, her mind working through possibilities. This was how she often thought through complex cases, moving physically as her thoughts developed. What if, she said finally, instead of filing charges, we use this as an opportunity for education? For real change? Reynolds looked skeptical. What did you have in mind? A program, Isabel said, her voice becoming more confident as the idea took shape. A community-based program focusing on bias awareness for local businesses. Not just a one-time sensitivity training, but an ongoing commitment. She turned to face them. Frank Miller wouldn't just get a slap on the wrist. He'd have to actively participate, to learn and grow and then share that knowledge with others. His store could become a model for how businesses should operate. Tina frowned. You think he'd agree to that? Voluntarily? It would be that or face charges, Isabel said simply. I think he'd choose the program. Diaz looked thoughtful. Our department has been talking about community policing initiatives. This could fit well with that. Exactly, Isabel said, warming to the idea. The police, local businesses, community leaders, we could all work together. This incident could be the catalyst for something much bigger than just punishing one store owner. Reynolds scratched his head. It's an interesting idea, Judge Washington, but setting something like that up would take time, resources. I'm aware, Isabel said, and I'm willing to commit both. This matters to me. She paused. But first I want to talk to Frank Miller directly. Not as a customer he wrongly accused, but as Judge Washington. The officers exchanged glances again. We could arrange that, Reynolds said. Would you want us present? Isabel considered this. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. But not at the store. I'd like him to come here. To the courthouse? Diaz asked, surprise evident in his voice. Yes, Isabel said firmly. I want him to see me in my element, to understand fully who I am and what I do. I think it will help drive home the lesson. Reynolds nodded slowly. We can make that happen. When would you like to do this? Isabel checked her calendar. Tomorrow afternoon I have a break between hearings. Around 2 p.m. We'll bring him in, Reynolds promised. After the officers left, Tina turned to Isabel with a mix of admiration and concern on her face. Are you sure about this? It's a lot of work and it lets him off the hook in a way. Isabel shook her head. I'm not letting him off the hook. I'm putting him to work. And yes, it will take effort, but what's the alternative? I punish one man, get a fleeting sense of satisfaction, and nothing really changes? She picked up a framed photo from her desk, a picture of her with her parents at her judicial appointment ceremony. Her father, who had marched with Dr. King, and her mother, who had been among the first black teachers at a previously all-white school in their hometown. My parents didn't raise me to seek revenge, she said softly. They raised me to seek justice, and sometimes justice looks different than people expect. Tina smiled. Well, when you put it that way, what can I do to help? For starters, Isabel said, returning to her desk, find out who runs the diversity training programs for the judicial employees. I want to see what they're teaching, and if it can be adapted for our purposes. Then reach out to the community outreach coordinator at the police department. She paused, thinking, and I want to know more about Frank Miller. How long he's owned that store, his background, any complaints that might have been filed against him in the past. Tina raised an eyebrow. You're really diving into this. I am, Isabel agreed. Because yesterday Frank Miller saw a black woman in casual clothes and decided she was a criminal. He never once considered that she might be a federal judge. That kind of prejudice doesn't just hurt the people targeted by it, it limits the person holding it. Frank Miller's worldview is small and distorted, and that's a prison of its own kind. She turned back to the window, looking out at the city she had served for 15 years. Maybe I can't fix everything that's wrong out there, but I can try to change one small corner of it. Tina nodded, already making notes. I'll get started right away. As Tina left the chambers, Isabel remained at the window, watching people on the street below. From this height, they all looked the same. Just people going about their lives. No labels, no assumptions, no prejudices visible from here. If only it could be that way up close, she thought. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Officer Diaz. Mr. Miller has agreed to meet tomorrow. We'll bring him to your chambers at 2 p.m. Isabel texted back a simple thank you and put her phone away. Tomorrow would be an important day. Not just for her and Frank Miller, but potentially for the whole community. For now, though, she had a courtroom waiting and justice to dispense. Judge Isabel Washington straightened her robe, gathered her files, and prepared to face the day with the same dignity and determination she had always shown. Some things never changed, and some things needed to. At precisely 1:45 p.m. the next day, Isabel stood in her chambers adjusting her judicial robe. She had debated whether to wear it for her meeting with Frank Miller. Would it be too intimidating? Too theatrical? In the end, she decided that it was important for him to see her fully in her professional role. Not as the woman in casual clothes he had profiled in his store, but as Judge Washington, respected federal judge with the power to change lives with her decisions. A soft knock on the door announced Tina's arrival. "They're here, Judge. Officers Reynolds and Diaz with Mr. Miller." Isabel nodded, taking a deep breath. "Give me 5 minutes, then send them in." When Tina left, Isabel moved to her desk and sat down, arranging several folders in front of her. One contained the information Tina had gathered about Frank Miller. Another held details about community programs addressing racial bias. The third contained police reports of similar incidents that had occurred in their city over the past year, incidents where the victims didn't have the protection of a federal judge's title. At exactly 2 p.m., Tina opened the door. Judge Washington, Officers Reynolds and Diaz with Mr. Frank Miller. The 3 men entered the chambers. The officers nodded respectfully to Isabel, while Frank looked like he might be sick. His face was pale and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the room. He wore what was clearly his best suit, slightly outdated and a bit too tight around the middle, but freshly pressed. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller," Isabel said, her voice calm and professional. "Please, all of you, have a seat." The officers sat with practiced ease, but Frank perched on the edge of his chair as if ready to bolt at any moment. His eyes darted around the impressive chambers, taking in the law books lining the walls, the heavy wooden furniture, and the framed credentials hanging behind Isabel's desk. "Mr. Miller," Isabel began, "do you understand why you're here today?" Frank cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor. Because of what happened at my store." His voice was barely above a whisper. "What exactly happened at your store, Mr. Miller?" Isabel pressed. "In your own words," Frank shifted uncomfortably. "I made a mistake. I thought you were shoplifting. And why did you think that?" Isabel kept her tone neutral, as if she were simply seeking information in her courtroom. Frank stared at his hands. "You seem suspicious." "Suspicious how?" Isabel leaned forward slightly. "What specific behaviors did I exhibit that made you suspicious?" Frank's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. "Mr. Miller," Isabel said, "I was in your store for less than 10 minutes. I selected items for my dinner, put them in a basket, and prepared to pay for them. At what point did my behavior suggest criminal intent?" Frank looked desperately at the officers, who offered no assistance. I don't know," he finally admitted. "I just had a feeling." "A feeling," Isabel repeated. "Based on what?" The room was silent except for the ticking of the large clock on the wall. Frank's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Based on how I looked," Isabel said finally, filling the silence. "Based on the color of my skin?" Frank's eyes remained fixed on his hands, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Isabel opened the third folder on her desk and pulled out several pages of statistics. In the past year, there have been 37 reported incidents of racial profiling in retail establishments in our city. 37 people who were followed, questioned, searched, or detained while shopping, simply because of how they looked. She slid the papers across the desk. And those are just the reported cases. How many people walk away humiliated but say nothing? How many accept this treatment as just part of their daily lives? Frank finally looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and defensiveness. "I'm not a racist," he said, his voice stronger now. "I've never used slurs. I've hired black employees." Isabel nodded. "I believe you don't think of yourself as racist, Mr. Miller. Most people don't. But our actions often reveal biases we don't even realize we have." She opened the first folder. "You've owned Miller's convenience store for 22 years. Before that, you worked for your father, who opened it in 1975. You're an active member of the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Club. You've sponsored a Little League team for the past 15 years. By all accounts, you're a respected businessman and community member." Frank looked surprised that she knew so much about him. "And yet," Isabel continued, There have been 3 complaints filed against your store in the past 5 years, all from Black or Hispanic customers who felt they were treated with suspicion or hostility. None resulted in any action being taken. She closed the folder. That pattern suggests something, Mr. Miller. Something I think we need to address. Frank's defensiveness returned. So what happens now? You're going to sue me? Have me arrested? Destroy my business because I made one mistake? Isabel studied him for a moment. Actually, I had something different in mind. Something that might actually make a difference, not just for me, but for everyone in our community. She opened the second folder and handed him a document. This is a proposal for a new community initiative focused on addressing unconscious bias in local businesses. It would involve training for business owners and employees, community discussions, and ongoing evaluation. Frank looked confused as he skimmed the document. And you want, what, my store to participate? I want your store to be the pilot program, Isabel said. I want you, personally, to go through comprehensive training on recognizing and addressing bias. And then, I want you to become an advocate for this program with other business owners. Frank looked up, clearly stunned. You want me to, what? To learn, Mr. Miller, to grow, and to help others do the same. Isabel leaned back in her chair. It's either that or I file charges for unlawful detention and pursue a civil rights case. The choice is yours. Officer Reynolds, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. The police department is fully supportive of this initiative, Mr. Miller. We'd be working alongside you and Judge Washington to implement it. This isn't about punishment, Officer Diaz added. It's about making real change. Frank looked down at the document again, reading more carefully this time. This would take a lot of time. My store, we've thought of that, Isabel interrupted. The program includes resources to help cover staffing while you're participating in training. No one wants your business to suffer, Mr. Miller. That's not the goal here. Frank was quiet for a long moment. And if I do this, the charges go away? There would be no charges filed, Isabel confirmed. As long as you fully participate in the program and meet all its requirements. Frank looked from the document to Isabel, then to the officers. Why are you giving me this chance? After what I did? Isabel stood up and walked around her desk, sitting in the chair directly across from Frank. Without the desk between them, the dynamic shifted from judge and defendant to simply 2 people talking. Because punishment alone doesn't create change, Mr. Miller. It might satisfy a desire for justice in the moment, but it doesn't address the root causes. What happened in your store has happened countless times to countless people. Punishing you won't stop that. She gestured to the document in his hands. But this might actually make a difference. Not just for one store owner or one customer, but for our whole community. Frank studied her face, seeing not anger or vengeance, but a genuine desire for positive change. Something in his expression softened slightly. I need some time to think about this, he said finally. Isabel nodded. Of course. Take 24 hours. Officers Reynolds and Diaz will meet with you tomorrow to get your decision. As the 3 men prepared to leave, Isabel stood. Mr. Miller, she said, causing him to pause at the door. I hope you make the right choice. Not just for your sake, but for everyone's. After they left, Tina entered the chambers. How did it go? Isabel sighed, removing her judicial robe and hanging it carefully on the coat rack. About as expected. He's scared, defensive, but I think there's a chance he'll agree to the program. And if he doesn't? Tina asked. Isabel's expression grew serious. Then we move forward with legal action. I won't let this go, Tina. Too many people have let these incidents go for too long. Tina nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Offering him a path to redemption instead of just punishment. It's not about redemption, Isabel said thoughtfully. It's about education. About creating a community where people can recognize their biases and work to overcome them. Where someone like me can shop for groceries without being treated like a criminal. She moved to the window, looking out at the city. One store, one owner at a time. It's a small start, but it's something. It's more than something, Tina said firmly. It's everything. It's how real change happens. Isabel smiled at her clerk's enthusiasm. Let's see what Frank decides tomorrow. Then we'll know if we're really making progress. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her chambers, Isabel returned to her desk. She had a full docket of cases tomorrow, people counting on her wisdom and fairness. The work never stopped. But now, alongside her regular duties, she had taken on something new, something personal yet universal. Win or lose with Frank Miller, she had started something important. And Judge Isabel Washington was not one to leave things unfinished. 6 months had passed since the incident at Miller's convenience store. The early autumn air carried the first hint of coolness as Isabel made her way down Oak Street, her heels clicking steadily on the sidewalk. She paused outside the store, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before pushing open the door. The bell chimed just as it had that day, but this time the store looked different. New signs hung on the walls, colorful posters declaring everyone welcome here and community first. The security cameras were still there, but now a sign clearly stated the store's policy. For everyone's safety, not for profiling. Behind the counter stood Frank Miller, discussing inventory with a young black woman who appeared to be training as a new cashier. When he saw Isabel, he straightened up immediately. "Judge Washington," he said, his voice carrying none of the suspicion or hostility from their first encounter. "Good to see you, Mr. Miller," Isabel replied with a nod. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see how things are going." Frank came around the counter, gesturing to the young woman. "This is Lucia, our new assistant manager." "Lucia, this is Judge Washington." "The Judge Washington?" Lucia asked, her eyes widening with recognition. "The one who started the program?" Isabel smiled. "I played a small part. The real work has been done by people like Mr. Miller here." Frank looked embarrassed but pleased by the acknowledgement. "We're just trying to do better. Learn and grow, like you said." Isabel glanced around the store, noting the changes. "How's the program been working out for you?" "Honestly," Frank said, leading her toward the coffee station in the corner where they could talk. "It's been the hardest thing I've ever done. And the best." He poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Isabel without asking if she wanted it. A small gesture of hospitality that wasn't lost on her. "The training sessions were tough," he continued, "having to confront things about myself I didn't want to see. Biases I didn't even know I had." He shook his head. "Some days I wanted to quit, but you didn't," Isabel observed. "No," Frank agreed. "I kept thinking about what you said in your chambers that day. About how this wasn't just about one incident or one store. It was bigger than that." He took a sip of his coffee, and then something started to change. I started to see things differently. Started questioning my own assumptions. Started really looking at how I was treating people. Isabel nodded, listening carefully. "Business has actually improved." Frank continued with a hint of surprise in his voice. "Word got around about the changes we're making. People who never shopped here before are coming in now. And I've had 5 other store owners reach out to ask about joining the program." "That's exactly what we hoped would happen," Isabel said. "The ripple effect." Frank looked at her directly. "I need to thank you, Judge Washington. You could have ruined me. Had me arrested. Sued me for everything I had. Instead, you gave me a chance to be better." Isabel shook her head. "I didn't do it for you, Mr. Miller. I did it for all the people who walk through your door, and for this community." "I know," Frank said. "That's why it meant so much." The bell over the door chimed again as a customer entered. Isabel recognized Officer Diaz, now out of uniform and apparently stopping by on his day off. "Judge Washington," he said with genuine pleasure. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Just checking in," she replied. "Seeing how our pilot program is going." "Going great from what I hear," Diaz said. "The department's been getting positive feedback from the community. Chief wants to expand it to other neighborhoods." Frank nodded. "I'm supposed to speak at the Chamber of Commerce meeting next week. Share my experience with other business owners." "Nervous?" Isabel asked. "Terrified," Frank admitted with a small laugh. "But it's important. If I can help even one other person avoid making the mistakes I made." He trailed off, the implication clear. Diaz checked his watch. "I hate to interrupt, but Judge, aren't you supposed to be at the community center in 20 minutes? The youth mentorship program launch?" Isabel glanced at her own watch. "You're right. I should get going." She turned to Frank. "I'm glad to see the progress here, Mr. Miller. Keep up the good work." As she turned to leave, Frank called after her. "Judge Washington? Would you consider coming to the chamber meeting? Maybe say a few words about the program?" Isabel paused, considering the request. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined being asked by this man to speak alongside him. Now it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "I'd be happy to," she said. Have your coordinator call my office for the details." Outside, Officer Diaz fell into step beside her. "That was quite a change from the Frank Miller I brought to your chambers 6 months ago." "People can change," Isabel said, "when given the right opportunity and motivation." "Still," Diaz said, "not everyone would have done what you did. Most people would have wanted revenge, not rehabilitation." Isabel stopped walking. It was never about revenge or rehabilitation. It was about justice. Real justice, not just punishment. They continued toward the community center, where dozens of local teens would be paired with professional mentors, judges, lawyers, doctors, business owners, including several store owners who had gone through the bias awareness program. "You know," Diaz said thoughtfully, "when we first got the call about the incident at Miller's store, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Isabel smiled. "Neither did I. But sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, if we're willing to do the hard work." The community center came into view, its steps already crowded with young people and adult volunteers. Isabel spotted Tina among them, clipboard in hand, helping organize the event. Her clerk had thrown herself into the community initiative with enthusiasm, often working late into the evening on program details. As they approached, several people noticed Isabel and called out greetings. A young girl, no more than 16, broke away from the group and hurried over. "Judge Washington, I got accepted to pre-law at State University," she announced, practically bouncing with excitement. "I start next fall." "That's wonderful news, Zoe," Isabel said warmly, remembering the shy girl she'd met during a court tour last year. "You've worked hard for this." "It's because of you," Zoe said earnestly. "Seeing you in that courtroom, hearing your story, it made me believe I could do it too." Isabel felt a lump forming in her throat. "You're doing it because of your own brilliance and determination. I just showed you what was possible." As Zoe rejoined her friends, Isabel turned to Diaz. "This is why I became a judge, not just to interpret the law, but to help shape a community where justice means something real." Inside the community center, the large meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a podium. Posters around the room displayed the program's motto, "Building Bridges, Breaking Biases." Isabel took her place at the front of the room, looking out at the sea of faces, young and old, all races and backgrounds, all part of the same community, her community. She thought back to that evening 6 months ago, standing in Frank Miller's store, accused of a crime she didn't commit. The humiliation, the anger, the familiar weight of being judged not by her character but by her appearance. In that moment, she could have chosen the path of personal retribution, could have used her power and position to punish one man for one act of discrimination. It would have been easier, maybe even satisfying in the short term. Instead, she had chosen the harder path, the path of systemic change. And now, looking at this room full of people committed to creating a more just and equitable community, she knew it had been the right choice. As the program director approached the microphone to begin the event, Isabel took a deep breath. There was still so much work to be done. So many minds to change, systems to reform, barriers to break down. The road ahead was long, but today, in this room, she could see progress. Real, tangible progress. From one painful incident had grown a movement for positive change that was spreading through the community, touching lives and opening minds. Not everyone got to see the impact of their work so clearly. As a judge, Isabel often wondered what happened to the people who passed through her courtroom after she handed down her rulings. Did they change? Did they grow? Did justice truly prevail? Today, at least, she knew the answer was yes. Sometimes justice looked like a store owner who learned to see beyond his biases. Sometimes it looked like a police department committed to community building rather than just enforcement. Sometimes it looked like a room full of young people who believed they could be anything. Judges, lawyers, leaders, regardless of the color of their skin. As the director called her name and she stepped up to the podium, Judge Isabel Washington smiled. This was what justice looked like, and it was beautiful.